Lydia Cole had grown up on land that never gave more than it took. The soil was stubborn, cracked, and mean, and the wind that swept across the plains could strip the color right out of a person's hope. But she still tried, every day, to carve out a little space where she could feel like herself. At 18, she was not a girl anymore, but she had never been allowed to feel like a young woman, either. Her days were measured by chores, not choices. That morning, she had risen before the sun, rubbing sleep from her eyes as she stoked the fire and mixed the dough for the day's bread. Her father, Jedediah, was already sitting at the rickety kitchen table, staring at nothing as though the past and future had both abandoned him. His face was hollow from years of drought, his hands trembling slightly from the weight of debts no one asked him to carry, but he carried them all the same. Lydia glanced at him with quiet worry. "Pa, you all right?" he grunted. "Just get the bread going." She knew the tone, sharp as a barbed wire fence. It warned her not to pry, not to hope, not to push. So she turned back to her work, kneading the dough until her fingers ached. When the sound of wagon wheels rolled into the yard, Lydia's heart lifted for a brief moment. Visitors were rare. Maybe it was someone selling seeds. Maybe news from town. Maybe, just maybe, a break in their luck. But when she stepped outside, wiping flour from her hands, her hopeful breath hitched. It was the traveling merchant, Mr. Fallon, a man known for buying low, selling high, and carrying his conscience lighter than the dust on his boots. Jedediah stepped out beside her, shoulders hunched. "Fallon," he greeted stiffly. "Cole." Fallon tugged his hat brim. "Heard you were needing supplies." "Need flour." "Bad." Jedediah's voice cracked like dry timber. "Can't pay coin." Fallon clicked his tongue. "Well, now, I'm sure we can work something out." Their eyes met, two men desperate for different reasons. Lydia didn't like how Fallon's gaze slid toward her, lingering too long, assessing her like a tool sitting on a shelf. Her stomach twisted. "Pa," she whispered. Jedediah didn't answer. "Not yet." Fallon hopped down from his wagon, brushing dust from his pants. "Tell you what," he said casually, "I'll give you a sack of flour, and food salts, coffee, maybe even a new plow blade." Lydia blinked. That was far too much for anything Jedediah had left to trade. Fallon's smirk widened. "In exchange, I'll take the girl." The words struck Lydia like a slap. "Pa," her voice broke. "What's he talking about?" Jedediah flinched but kept his eyes glued to the wagon. You'll go with him. Work in the camp kitchen. Better food than here. Better chance." "Chance at what?" Lydia's throat tightened. "At being owned." Fallon snorted. "Girl, I'm not buying you. Just borrowing your labor. Long trip, but you'll be fed, clothed." Lydia stepped back, breath shaking. "Pa, you can't." Jedediah snapped, eyes aflame with shame and desperation. "We need the flour. Your brothers will starve. And you're grown. You can work. Do your part." "I do my part," Lydia cried. "Every day. But you're giving me away like the only thing left worth trading," he finished bitterly. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Fallon crossed his arms, waiting, smug and certain. Lydia turned in circles, looking at the lean-to barn, the dry well, the fields she'd tended since she was a child. All of it felt suddenly foreign, unsafe, and the father she'd trusted, fractured and fading, wouldn't meet her eyes. Her world crumbled in a single breath. "Pack your things," Jedediah muttered. "It's done." It wasn't a choice. Not hers, not really his. It was despair dressed as necessity. 2 hours later, Lydia sat rigid on Fallon's wagon bench, her small bundle on her lap. The homestead shrank behind her, fences, roof, childhood, all dissolving into the dusty horizon. She didn't cry at first. Shock held her in place. But when the road grew rough and the sun dipped low, her tears came quietly, tracing paths down her dust-speckled cheeks. Fallon didn't notice. 3 days passed in a blur of jolting wheels and dry rations. Lydia barely slept. Fallon spoke only of practical matters, routes, supply shortages, the mining camp ahead. She felt less like a passenger and more like cargo. Then, on the 4th day, the wagon hit a deep rut. The wheels splintered with a crack that echoed across the plains. Fallon cursed loudly. Useless road. They were stranded, miles from anywhere, except a fenced grazing stretch that stood out against the wilderness. Well kept, strong, alive, a ranch. "We'll get help there," Fallon grumbled. Lydia followed, weary, exhausted, clinging to the last threads of the life she'd known. She did not know that her life was about to change again. But this time, not by being taken. This time, by being seen. Cave Turner's ranch had a quietness to it, A kind of steady calm that wrapped itself around Lydia like a warm blanket she wasn't sure she was allowed to accept. The first hours she spent there felt unreal, as though she were walking through a life that belonged to someone braver, someone less traded. Fallon sat at the long kitchen table muttering about his wheel, while Cade's ranch hands worked outside. Lydia tried to make herself small, but Cade's gaze kept finding her, not in the way Fallon's had, calculating and ownership-driven, but with concern, curiosity, and something she hadn't felt in years, respect. "Sit," Cade said gently when he saw her hovering near the doorway. "You look like you haven't eaten properly in days." Her stomach betrayed her with a low growl. She flushed, embarrassed, but Cade simply ladled stew from the pot and placed a bowl in front of her. Steam rose in fragrant curls. "Thank you," she murmured. "No thanks needed." He sat across from her, hands loose, posture relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, watchful. "How long has Fallon had you traveling with him?" Lydia swallowed her first spoonful, and the warmth nearly made her cry. 3 days. Cade's brow tightened. "And where were you headed?" Fallon answered before she could. "Mining camp. Need a kitchen hand." "She'll do fine." Cade didn't look away from Lydia. "Is that true? Is that where you want to go?" Lydia hesitated, torn between fear of making Fallon angry and the sudden, achingly sweet realization that someone was actually asking her what she wanted. "I don't know," she whispered. Fallon scoffed. "She knows well enough. Her father traded her. That makes it legal." Lydia's breath caught. She'd prayed he wouldn't say it aloud. Cade's entire demeanor changed. The calmness was still there, but now it was undercut by steel. "Her father traded her. For what?" "Flour," Fallon said, as though it were nothing more than a plank of wood. Cade leaned back slowly, expression unreadable. "And you accepted the trade?" Fallon shrugged. "Man's desperate, girl's strong. I need help." Cade's gaze returned to Lydia, softer now. "Is this your wish, to go with him?" She bit her lip, shaking her head before she could stop herself. "No, I don't want to go." "Girl," Fallon snapped, "don't start." Cade's voice cut through the air like a blade. "If you raise your voice at her again, you'll leave this place without your wagon." Fallon's mouth snapped shut. Lydia stared between them, stunned. No one had ever spoken up for her with such steady conviction. Her heart raced with a mixture of fear and relief. Cade nodded toward the food. "Eat. You're safe here." Safe. The word settled into her bones, unfamiliar but needed. As the stew warmed her, Cade studied her hands, raw, red, blistered from kneading dough and hauling water. "You've worked hard your whole life, haven't you?" he asked quietly. "That's what daughters do," she said before she thought better of it. "Not like that," Cade murmured. For the first time, Lydia felt the weight of exhaustion hit her like a physical force. The fear, the road, the betrayal, they all swirled together until her shoulders sagged. When Fallon stepped outside to check the wheel repair, Cade rose and poured her a cup of water. "Lydia," he said softly, "you don't belong to him. Or to anyone." She blinked rapidly. "But my father made a terrible choice," Cade finished. "But your father's decision doesn't define your freedom." The words struck her like a revelation. A painful one, a beautiful one. Before she could respond, Fallon stormed back in. "Wheels fixed. Time to go." Lydia froze. Cade stepped between her and Fallon, his stance calm but immovable. "She stays. This isn't your business." Fallon barked. "She's mine." "She's not yours," Cade said, voice dropping lower, harder. "And you know it." Fallon's face reddened. "I'll have the law on you." Cade raised a brow. "You want to explain to a judge how you bought a woman for a sack of flour?" Fallon faltered. Even he knew how that would sound. Cade didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply stood with the quiet, unshakable strength of a man who protected what was right, not what was his. "Leave," Cade said. "Now." Fallon spit on the ground and climbed onto his wagon, seething. "This ain't over." Cade didn't watch him go. Instead, he turned to Lydia, offering not command, not pity, but choice. "You're welcome to stay," he murmured. "As long as you need. As long as you want." Lydia's eyes stung. No one had ever asked her what she wanted. Ever. And in that moment, standing in Cade Turner's kitchen, dust still on her dress, fear still in her chest, she felt something flicker inside her. Not hope, not yet, but the first trembling breath of worth. The morning Cade discovered Fallon's tracks near the west fence line, Lydia had woken early, drawn by a strange heaviness in the air. She stepped onto the porch and saw Cade crouched in the dirt, fingertips brushing the earth with the calm precision of a man who had spent his life reading the land. His shoulders were tight, a tension she hadn't seen before. Is something wrong? She called softly. Cade stood slowly, brushing dust off his hands. His eyes met hers, steady but troubled. Fallon's been here, not close enough to threaten, but close enough to watch. A cold shiver slid down Lydia's spine. Even after a month on the ranch, days filled with steady work, warm meals, laughter from the ranch hands, fear could still slip its claws around her heart with terrifying ease. I don't want anyone hurt because of me, she whispered. Cade stepped closer, his voice low and unwavering. No one's getting hurt, and no one is taking you. I promise you that. Something in his tone made her believe him, more deeply than she'd believed anything in her life. Still, Cade doubled the night patrols. Ranch hands rotated by lantern light, and Lydia often caught Cade standing on the porch long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring into the dark with the quiet determination of a guardian. A week passed like this before Fallon finally made his move. It happened just after sunrise. Lydia was helping in the kitchen when one of the ranch hands shouted from the yard, "Riders coming." She froze, heart thudding painfully against her ribs. Cade was out the door before she could step outside, but she followed, hands trembling. 3 riders approached, the one in front unmistakably Fallon, shoulders square with wounded pride and anger. He pulled his horse to a halt mere yards from the porch. "Turner," he barked, "you've got something that ain't yours." Cade walked forward, calm, unarmed, but carrying a presence so solid it felt like a wall between Lydia and danger. "If you've come for Lydia, turn around. She's not leaving with you." Fallon's face contorted. "She was traded to me." "Traded," Cade repeated with disgust. "Not chosen, not given, not agreed. Traded, like a mule. You think that holds any weight here?" One of Fallon's men muttered, "Maybe we oughta just take her." Cade's ranch hands stepped out from the barn and porch, rifles lowered but ready. The air thickened. Fallon sneered, "You gonna start a war over a girl that ain't worth $5? Lydia flinched. The words sliced deeper than she wanted to admit. But before the hurt could settle, Cade turned slightly, just enough so Fallon could see the fire in his eyes. "Don't you ever speak of her worth," he said, voice steady but trembling with restrained fury. "Not when you wouldn't recognize value if it was handed to you in gold." Fallon's horse shifted, sensing its rider's unease. Cade stepped forward, one step, firm, deliberate. "If you or your men come onto my land again, you'll answer to me and every man standing behind me. And if you think I won't defend her, you're dumber than you look." The tension stretched tight enough to snap. Fallon spat into the dust. "She's not worth the trouble," he snarled. "Keep her, see if I care." He jerked his reins, turning his horse sharply. His men followed, glancing nervously at Cade before riding off. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Lydia release the breath she'd been holding. Her knees weakened, she sank onto the porch steps. Cade turned and knelt beside her. "You all right?" Her voice was a whisper. "Why did you do that? Why risk so much for me?" Cade hesitated, choosing his words with the same care he used in everything. "Because you deserve to live without fear. Because you're not a burden. Because you're not something to trade." His voice softened. "Because you matter, Lydia." No one had ever spoken to her like that. That evening, the ranch settled back into its usual rhythm, but Lydia's heart did not. She found Cade in the barn brushing down his horse. He didn't notice her at first, and she took a moment just to watch him, the gentleness in his movements, the quiet strength in his posture, the way the last of the sunlight warmed the edges of his silhouette. "Cade," she said softly. He looked up immediately. Concern flashed across his face. "Are you feeling safe now?" Lydia nodded. "Safe, and something else." She stepped closer, her fingertips brushing the wooden stall. "My father gave me away like I meant nothing. Fallon treated me like property. All my life, I've been what someone else needed. Someone else used." She paused, heart pounding. "But you've given me something I didn't even know I'd lost." Cade's voice was gentle. "And what's that?" "My worth," she whispered. His breath caught. He set the brush down and stepped closer, leaving only a breath between them. "Lydia," he murmured, "you had worth long before you came here. I just saw what others were too blind to notice." She lifted her chin, eyes glistening. "And if I choose to stay, if I choose you." Cade's expression softened into something warm, hopeful, almost reverent. "Then I'll spend my life proving you made the right choice." Lydia reached for his hand, and when he gently folded his fingers around hers, she felt the final piece of herself settle into place. Her father had traded her away for a sack of flour. But this ranch, this man, this new beginning. They gave her back something far more precious. A life, a future, and herself.